We had our first session that was quite interesting. It was devoted to Russia as an international financial center, let's be honest, a regional financial center, because we talked about attracting issuers from neighboring countries to the Russian market. And the biggest possible task for the Russian market is attracting Chinese issuers. And we have a common border with China. Now we're going to talk about local markets in several regional countries. To be precise, it's about 4 countries: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Belarus, and Armenia. Today is quite an interesting day, and in the Telegram channel of Sibons, do subscribe to it if you haven't. And there I read about an audiobook for Kazakhstan's bonds. So that's an ongoing bond issue, a sovereign issue denominated in rubles. That's 4 series worth 10 billion rubles each, and there will be double listing on the Moscow exchange and the Astana International Exchange. That's the Astana Financial Center. So that's an ongoing deal today. And Kazakhstan is the second country in terms of importance of its debt market and financial markets in the post-Soviet space. And our first speaker in this session is Farhad Akonov, chairman of the management board Halyk Finance. Halyk Finance gets Sibons Awards as the best investment bank of Kazakhstan, and it's a tradition. And when we mention investment banking in Kazakhstan, that's always Halyk Finance. The floor is yours. Do introduce Kazakhstan. Sergey, thank you very much for arranging this event. I guess that people have been missing this offline format, and everybody's bored with Zoom. So thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to each other, to network at this Sibons venue. So I wish you all a productive day and prolific discussions. I'll try to be quick to do it quite in an informative way, and the presentation will answer a simple question about the current situation in the bond market of Kazakhstan. In a nutshell, I will give you a summary, an overall picture, and then my next slides will expand my ideas. So if I run out of time, then Sergey will be able to stop me, and I won't miss anything. So the current yields on government bonds in Kazakhstan are higher than the beginning of last year, though over the past months we've seen a downward trend, but we'll see where it comes, because inflationary pressure defines the national bank's policy. The base rate has been at the same level for months, but bond rates for government and corporate bonds in the primary market indicate that this pressure is there. And the current inflation corridor is beyond the target range set by the National Bank at 4 to 6%, and that means that the market doesn't rule out rate increases, and we as an investor closed our positions on long-term securities several months ago, and we are afraid to buy long-term securities and prefer short-term ones. And in the Kazakhstan market, the trend is like that. Investors buying long-term bonds require much higher yields than a year ago. A big amount of borrowing is carried out by quasi-public companies and entities. That's a shame to say that, but this is a dominant sector in a Kazakhstan market, and private issuers have limited opportunities, and quasi-public companies offer big amounts, and bonds are now placed there at the market level at double-digit yields at about 11% on average. That's what quasi-public entities are paying now. Such issuers as Development Bank of Kazakhstan, Bayterak Holding and their subsidiaries. And that's what spoils our Kazakhstan investors. They would consider absorbing private issuer risk at a premium, but not every private sector issuer can afford to pay this premium. And there was a time when the bond market was a competitor to bank financing for SMEs, and this time is over. And the only big segment of the private sector still getting into the bond market is microfinance companies and leasing companies. And as you know, they have a very big margin initially, so their effective rate on their assets is about 40% per annum and more, so these companies can afford placing bonds at 18 to 20%. We'll speak about that later. Repo transactions take up a big share of the secondary market. The trend when primary debt amounts exceed secondary trading is still present, though it's contracting, but this is some kind of nonsense for this country. And our investors are largely buy and hold investors. What they do is they buy bonds and hold them to maturity. The only thing they can do is use bonds for repo transactions, as secondary trading is not very active. We have a positive trend here. We have a record high share of non-residents in government securities. We hope that this trend will be more or less sustainable, and in the past we had peaks like that, but they were short-term peaks. Now we are in a situation when, on the one hand, the exchange rate has stabilized somehow, and this gives us ground for carry traders to come to our markets and buy short-term instruments with tenors of 3 to 6 months. But these are considerable amounts for Kazakhstan. We have about 15% of non-residents in the National Bank's notes. The total amount of government securities held by non-residents is about 800 billion tenge. And the product line is now expanding. Earlier, non-residents held notes by the National Bank only, and now bonds of the Finance Ministry of Kazakhstan are available to them, though they are short-term instruments, but they make a difference. And there's a new trend, a magic word, ESG, that's been a buzzword today, and we'll hear it a lot today and tomorrow. Kazakhstan follows suit here and tries not to lag behind. So these are single projects and not quite big projects, but nevertheless, that's the beginning. That's an introduction of something new. And these are administrative or political projects in their nature so far, but still there is interest. And both platforms in Kazakhstan, that's the Kazakhstan Stock Exchange and Astana International Financial Center, try to simplify the listing and issue procedure for such securities, and we hope that the regulator will take up some measures on board to incentivize investors to participate in such issues. So maybe national holdings could have an obligatory minimum share of such securities in their mandates. So something will happen, and it's happening now, and we hope that this will result in some sustainable trend. That's what illustrates my ideas. So the National Bank's monetary policy is moderately stimulating now. The base rate has been the same since the middle of last year, so it's 9%. Further easing cannot be ruled out, but so far the inflation trend is quite strong, and we personally don't rule out a base rate hike before the end of the year, so we are really cautious as an investor, as I've already mentioned. This is so-called short-term rate gauge in our market. It is the corridor indicated by the National Bank's base rate range. Short-term instruments, overnight swaps, try-ons are volatile, especially on tax weeks or in case of exchange rate fluctuations. But so far, we haven't seen any significant deviations. The slide shows strong correlation between the ruble and dollar exchange rates, which is quite positive for the way Russian investors see Kazakhstan issuers and for Kazakhstan issuers eyeing the Russian market. When the correlation is quite strong, our issuers are looking at the Russian market more often, as there, despite the recent key rate hike, nominal rates are much lower than in Kazakhstan. So in the first session, we heard about several deals, such as Kazakhstan Food Contract Corporation, Samruk Casino Real Estate. These are issues that came to the Russian market over the past 12 months, and there are several projects now in the pipeline. And I hope this trend will be sustainable as well, and we also see interest from Russian players and investors in Kazakhstan securities, and in the share of non-residents mentioned by me, there are Russian players for sure, and the trend shown in the second chart, and the tenge has slightly appreciated, but this may be a short-term trend, but carry traders always cash in on that. They see this short-term trend and buy short-term securities, and that's when we can see the maximum level of interest from non-residents in government securities of Kazakhstan. In this slide, we show the market performance. And this is strange and weird moment, but that's our peculiarity. The primary market volume traditionally exceeds secondary trading volumes. And this shows that our investor profile is buy and hold. So as to active speculations, it's not for large-scale players. Those players who do make money on that, these are insurance companies and retail investors, and those are speculators. And they are not significant in Kazakhstan. They are small, and the rules are dictated by large-scale players, and they have a conservative approach to managing their portfolios. This slide is devoted to government bond placements. Look at the right-hand chart here, and the national bank's notes and bonds by the finance ministry are shown here, and here the market placements prevail. It's a good trend, and it shows that the state represented by the finance ministry accepts the terms dictated by investors. At least those placements are market placements. And if we look at 2019 and 2018 and earlier 2014, 2015, then there were virtually no market placements there, though now they prevail. Here we should pay attention to the yield. The yield curve in Kazakhstan is flat. It's somewhere around 10% or high nines, and that's the level where yields are. One thing that should be noted is demand for short-term securities and long-term securities. Demand for short-term securities is considerably higher than for long-term securities. At the national bank's auctions for 6-month notes or short-term offerings by the finance ministry, demand can exceed supply 8 to 10 times, and which is not the case, unfortunately, for long-term bonds. And that's the manifestation of the current trend, as investors are really cautious about possible rate hikes, and they prefer short-term instruments. That's the only instrument the National Bank has now. This is 6-month notes. The rate level is quite stable at the notch of 9.15%. It's been stable for the past 3 months, and demand exceeds supply several times. These notes are primarily bought by banks and the National Bank, represented by the pension funds, to park excessive liquidity in those instruments. Non-residents are shown here, and we are facing a historic peak both for the National Bank's notes and for the aggregate amount of notes and finance ministry bonds. If we look at the data of October 2020, the aggregate amount of government securities held by non-residents was equal to the amount of the National Bank's notes held by non-residents. It shows that non-residents could buy the National Bank's notes only at the time. Now the share includes also the finance ministry bonds, and it's the result of the finance ministry's work with Euroclear and Clearstream. They managed to streamline OTC trading, including the currency pair, and it's gratifying, and so non-residents now prefer not the National Bank's notes but the finance ministry bonds. Fahad, that's the time limit. Let's skip this slide then and move on and on and on. So that's the current Eurobond yield levels. We know that the rates are down, though they've increased a bit, but in the Eurobond market we cannot expect new Eurobond issues from Kazakhstan. Issues have now turned to liability management and they are asking for consents. They are restructuring their outstanding notes, and I guess this trend will carry through as Kazakhstan issues have got severely hit by devaluation several times that dealt a blow to their P&Ls. Though the rates in the Eurobond market is quite attractive, but issuers are afraid to get there and they prefer 10-year instruments with double-digit yields because they are more stable in terms of the devaluation risk. That's it. Thank you very much. Farhad, thank you very much. And let's have presentations first, and then there will be time for questions and answers. And as a moderator, I'll ask one question. Farhad, what's your insider vision for Russian participants? Because we've been hearing about Astana International Financial Center, and we know that there is Kazakhstan Stock Exchange that is partly owned by the Moscow Exchange and is integrated with it. So, as an insider, how do you see division of roles of between the Kazakhstan Stock Exchange and the Astana International Exchange? And where is the market going? That's a good one, Sergey. And we've been hearing it a lot because we have two platforms in Kazakhstan, and then the impression that what they do is the same. But they are different, and the Astana International Financial Center presents an opportunity to get integrated with international capital markets in the segments where the Kazakhstan Stock Exchange doesn't allow it. For example, it's about English law and English law jurisdiction and structuring securities under international law. Roughly speaking, if earlier, if a company wanted to do a bond issue not under Kazakhstan law, the only option for this company was resorting to the Eurobond market, which is expensive and requires a lot of consultants and documents, etc. Now, the Astana International Financial Center offers a simplified access, allowing issuers to issue the same instruments at a lower cost for local players. Overall, in the future, the Astana International Financial Center can generate the inflow of foreign players. We see Russian players there, and we see Renaissance Capital working there. Sava Capital is also working there. We know that some other large Russian brokers are considering this opportunity. Chinese companies are there, and European companies are becoming AIX members. And this integration will boost the volume of trading in international securities. And this will set prerequisites to increase our investor and issuer base. Thank you, Farhad. And now let's look at Uzbekistan. It's Kazakhstan's neighbor. We have two speakers from Uzbekistan, Bahadir Atahanov, chairman of the National Association of Investment Institutions, and Farukh Kodjaev, CEO, Capital Deposit. I don't know how you divided the topic of Uzbekistan. Bahadir, let's start with your presentation. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank Sergey for inviting me here. It's my second congress. The first time was in Tashkent in 2018. And it's gratifying that these meetings are held on a regular basis, and there will be a congress in September this year in Uzbekistan, and it's fabulous. So we've split the topic into the legislative framework and real cases. and Farouk will focus on the real situation. Now some information about the association. The association was set up, or I would rather say brought back to life this year. It existed from 2003 up to 2011. Then the global financial crisis forced the association founders to cease operations in 2011. This year, the association was founded again by leading investment companies in Uzbekistan. You can see the list in the slide, and I headed it. Before that, I was head of the regulator, so it's because of my experience that I got this post. Freedom Finance is on the participant list. You know this company full well. They are present in Kazakhstan and the Russian market. Then you can see Capital Deposit. Farouk is its founder and CEO, and you can see other companies. That's our legislative framework. I would like to say that the definition of securities in Uzbekistan is slightly different from the one given in the Civil Code of the Russian Federation. Russia is ahead of us as amendments were made, and there's a differentiation between certificated and uncertificated securities in the Civil Code in Russia, and we don't have it yet. But it's required for the methodology and the regulators, and the market works not puzzling its head over those terms. And these are fixed income and debt instruments that are allowed in Uzbekistan under our legislation. There are no deposit certificates in the list, and deposit certificates market is regulated by the central bank and finance ministry. Treasuries are here, it's their official name, and they are traded as short-term government bonds in practice. There was one mid-term government bond issue this year, but we don't have long-term government bonds so far. So the central bank bonds are here, and the central bank is our regulator, and the national bank is a commercial bank, as has been mentioned. And treasuries and central banks bonds are traded on the Uzbek Republican Currency Exchange, and corporate bonds are traded on the Tashkent Stock Exchange. We don't have infrastructure bonds yet, and in legislation, they've been present in 2015. International bonds are a new notion on the list, and it was related to Eurobonds and commercial banks issuing such bonds. Then we have promissory notes. They were present earlier, but then they were scrapped. We don't have them anymore. Corporate bonds. What is the definition of a corporate bond? Last year, limited liability companies and additional liability companies were allowed to issue corporate bonds. And before 2006, limited liability companies were able to and were allowed to issue corporate bonds, but then due to criminal cases that were opened, this was also scrapped, and legislation was revised for limited liability companies. Now the authorized government body has a right to set additional requirements on corporate bond issues, and limited liability companies again got a right to issue corporate bonds. These are additional requirements for bond issues placed on the stock exchange, and they are related to the use of collateral. Infrastructure bonds. Here we have legislation in place, and this notion was introduced in legislation because of the toughening of legislation on corporate bonds in 2006. And we saw significant growth in the bond market, and we were a leader in bond issuance in the post-Soviet space in the 2000s. So there was interest in the market, and we decided to set up a new instrument, infrastructure bonds, and they were bonds for state-owned companies, and state-owned companies were allowed to issue infrastructure bonds regardless of their form of incorporation. But unfortunately, it didn't work out. International bonds is an interesting topic in Uzbekistan for 2 to 3 years, and they were called international bonds, and the question was what name to choose, because Eurobonds are Eurobonds. But these bonds are issued in the national currency, so we came up with the name international bonds. I think the name was chosen correctly, and the definition is dubious. It's a traded security. Why is it traded? No other bond definition contains the word traded. And if the bond is not traded, it was just placed and that's it, and there is no secondary market, and that's often the case. The Finance Ministry is an authorized body, and as of the 1st of May, it became an authorized body regulating the securities market in Uzbekistan. Earlier, there was the Capital Markets Development Agency, and it was there for 2 years, and then it was closed on the 1st of May. The Finance Ministry is also an issuer of international bonds of Uzbekistan. What is an international bond of Uzbekistan? It's a sovereign bond issue. We have it defined in legislation what a bond is. So there is Article 741 in the Civil Code, and there is the law on the securities market. The principle is like that. What is not forbidden is allowed. I'm not a lawyer, but that's how it should be. What is not forbidden is allowed. But in practice in Russia and in all post-Soviet countries, people are really cautious. If it's not written in the law, then they don't do anything with it. Then exchange bonds, and we hope to see them in the future. Russia and other countries have this instrument, and we don't have it so far, and we hope to see it this year. And the law has been passed this year, and we hope to see this instrument in the market. Islamic bonds are a new trend. They've been discussed in Uzbekistan for 2 to 3 years by ministries and interested parties, but Uzbekistan is a predominantly Islamic country, and the amount of believers is growing. And there's a lot of interest in Islamic instruments, and the market is willing to buy those bonds, but we don't have legislative framework for them so far. So there were presidential decrees published several times, but in April the president issued a new decree to draft a document to regulate Islamic bonds, and by the end of the year I hope we will understand what Islamic bonds are, and I mean sukuk. So I hope we'll see this instrument trading in the market. Then we have mortgage-backed bonds. They have a long story. Before the global financial crisis of 2008, there was a trend out there, and our eyes were on the US and the US market. And instructions to draft a law on mortgage-backed bonds were given even earlier, and the first draft law was introduced in 2009, but the financial crisis was largely triggered by mortgage-backed instruments. Then the law was scrapped, and in 2014 the draft law was introduced again and then postponed again. And the company dealing with refinancing mortgage loans was set up, and it's going to issue mortgage-backed securities. It's founded by Uzbek banks, And that's the project of the Asian Development Bank, if I remember it correctly. The bank initiated setting up the company, and the company is here, it's in the market. So that's it. Now I'm ready to take your questions. Bahadir, thank you very much. Now, well, give the floor to Farouk, who'll speak about the instruments that are outstanding in the Uzbek market. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Farouk Khodjaev. I am CEO of Uzbek investment company Capital Deposit. It's a pleasure for me to talk here at this representative conference. I would like to thank the organizers to invite me here for the second time. The first time was in Tashkent in 2019. The topic was the same, the corporate bond market in Uzbekistan. That's what I'm going to talk about today. So I'll focus on the corporate bond market and not on the debt market in general. Now, I will give you some brief info about our company. We are called Cap Depot in Uzbekistan. We are an investment company and broker. We've been around since 2005, and we work in the capital market of Uzbekistan. We help private and institutional investors, including foreign investors, to enter the local market, and we help our companies raise financing in the local capital market. Then we provide consulting, brokerage, and depository services. Today I'm going to talk about the corporate bond market in Uzbekistan. I'm going to speak about successful bond placements, and I'll describe the current situation and the investment opportunities, and I will also mention risks. The corporate bond market in Uzbekistan underwent different stages. So from the year 2000 up to 2005, it was developing really fast. Then there was a period of stagnation until 2019. It was related to regulatory limitations on issuing bonds. So the key stop factors for companies willing to enter the market were requirements to the form of incorporation. So only joint stock companies were allowed to issue bonds, and there were requirements to collateral. Only corporate bonds secured by property could be issued. When the new president came to power in 2016, large-scale economic reforms were launched in the country. So in 2018, Uzbekistan got its sovereign rating for the first time in its history. And then we placed a very successful Eurobond worth $1 billion. Then several state-owned banks issued their Eurobonds, and the government understood what the instrument was about and decided to ease regulatory requirements for this instrument. Amendments were made in regulation. So limited liability companies got a right to issue bonds in 2019. And then we saw results of those steps, and starting from 2019, the market got more active. Big issuers came to the market. They were banks predominantly. So banks, developers, leasing companies, and microfinance companies and other companies came to the market. And despite the significant growth, the corporate bond market in Uzbekistan is still quite modest. The outstanding bond amount to GDP ratio is slightly above 0.1%. And corporate bonds as an instrument are not so popular with our investors and with our issuers as well. So that is not a popular instrument to raise financing. This one is an interesting topic: rates, inflation, and economic growth. So for the corporate bond market, there is a traditional competitor, and that's the banking sector. The central bank's key rate is 14%. Government securities are traded at the local stock exchange at roughly this rate. Then the bank deposit rate for legal entities is 16 to 17%, and for private individuals the bank deposit rate is 20 to 21%. That's a peculiarity of the banking segment in Uzbekistan. So the bank deposit rates are different for legal entities and for private individuals, for households. I don't know why this policy is like that, but it's the case. The midterm corporate bond rates for commercial banks is 18 to 19%, for leasing companies it is 20%, and for microfinance companies it is 22%. An average rate for US dollar denominated deposits for legal entities is 4%. For private individuals it's 5.5%. That's probably the highest rate in the CIS. We cannot issue bonds denominated in foreign currency. It's not allowed from the legal standpoint. Therefore, we've been issuing indexed bonds pegged to the US dollar, and the rate here is about 8%. When it comes to devaluation, inflation, and the economic growth, that's not a black and white picture. The annual devaluation of the SOM was 14.1% in 2019. Inflation was 15% over the same period, and we saw quite tremendous economic growth of 5.2% in 2019. In 2020, devaluation was 10.2%, inflation was 11.1%, and the economy slowed down to 0.6%. And now year to date, devaluation is quite low, 1.3%. Inflation forecast is at 10%, and the economic growth is 4.4%. As you can see, bank rates are very high. Deposits are lucrative both in the SOM and in USD. So it's difficult to compete with deposits when it comes to bonds. It's difficult to lure households and private individuals from bank deposits to the bond market, because banks have created fabulous conditions for them. Deposits are guaranteed, and there are no taxes there, and rates are really high, so households feel really good there. So when we arrange bond issues, our target is institutional investors and legal entities having excessive cash. Our issuers, even tier 1 issuers, often have to offer very high rates to be competitive and compete with the bank deposits, and that is the high yield segment. Why do we have such high rates in Uzbekistan? First of all, it's inflation. We have double-digit inflation, and the central bank limits bank lending to curb inflation. Then one more reason is devaluation, as people are used to the dollar being on the rise all the time, and it's the dollar appreciation that people are used to. Then we don't have enough investors and depositors even when the rates are so high. Why is that? It's the issue of trust and confidence and financial literacy of the population. And there is one more factor that's becoming more and more acute, and that's religious beliefs of the population. And our population is Muslim population, and it is not right to earn interest. So people are not willing to invest money and get interest payments. So Islamic finance is a very trendy topic in Uzbekistan, but these are just words. In real life it's not working because we don't have legislation and infrastructure in Uzbekistan. There is no single bank in Uzbekistan offering loans and extending loans based on Islamic principles, and entrepreneurs need money here and now to develop their business, and there are two ways to raise money somewhere. The first one is a classic bank loan, and the second way is selling bonds. Both ways are related to earning interest, and there is not enough demand in those instruments, and that is why our rates are on the rise, and this opens huge opportunities for foreign investors to invest in Uzbekistan, and investing in Uzbekistan is really lucrative. And in Kazakhstan, and my colleague will prove that and confirm that, dollar deposit rates are 1 or 1.5%, and our first-class bank, the National Bank of Uzbekistan, offers 5% per annum for dollar deposits. And we had a speaker from the NBU, and Kazakhstan investors invest money in Uzbek banks, and that's a fact, that's an ongoing trend. So what does the market lack to develop? First of all, we don't have enough high-quality issuers and investors. Then our liquidity is low. We have liquidity shortfalls in the secondary market. And we don't have a full-fledged system of rating assessment. We have rating agencies. There are 2 rating agencies in Uzbekistan, but with all due respect, the rating coverage of the bond market is really weak. Then, what the market lacks is complementary markets such as the repo market. We need a strong repo market, and it would balance liquidity issues in the secondary market. And then investors want to have hedging instruments such as CDS, etc. To sum it up, I can say that the corporate bond market in Uzbekistan looks like that, but we are certain it will be developing because there is a huge growth potential and there is political will in the country for that, and our infrastructure is quite good and our legislation is in place. We have platforms such as Tashkent Stock Exchange, first of all. We have quite interesting companies with quite good corporate governance, and they have quite good reporting. What we lack is investors. So, welcome to Uzbekistan. We have really lucrative rates. Risks are there as well, but where else don't you have them? But Uzbekistan is the country paying the highest premium for risk. And historically, Russia has been our older brother, and in Uzbekistan, the younger brother always tries to justify the older brother's confidence. Thank you. I'm ready to take your questions. Many people are now Googling tickets to Tashkent to come over here and buy Uzbek bonds. And that's quite an interesting topic because the rates are much higher. But then the question is about the infrastructure and access to the market for Russian investors when it comes to Uzbek bond market. And on the sidelines of the conference, that's a topic to discuss. And now we are moving on and we'll look west. So let's look at the bond market in Belarus. If you do a bond search on C-bonds and if you select Belarus there, and I did that, then you'll see almost 1,000 outstanding bonds. To be precise, there are 911 outstanding bonds in Belarus. So there are a lot of bonds in Belarus. In Russia, this figure is about 2,000 outstanding bonds, so it's not that much more. When I hear questions about the bond market in Belarus, then I say that the market is there, but bonds are not there. So there is almost no liquidity in the secondary market, and the pricing is a big question mark. We'll get more insider information from Taras Nadolny, first deputy chairman of the management board Bank Bell VAB. Sergey, thank you very much. Can I have a remote control, please? How do I use it? First of all, I would like to thank Sergey and the team because as a rule you organize fabulous events and your team provides active coverage of key regions and the CIS countries in particular, and Belarus is no exception to this rule. Today, presenting my material in front of such a representative audience, I will not stick to a classic agenda when we characterize market segments first, because all this information is available, it's public information, and there are a lot of instruments and issues in the market, but the market itself is not there. And I would like to focus on some peculiarities of our local market and speak about a new normal that's probably being shaped in the market. The life is like that there are a lot of opportunities around and we don't see them. And there's a quote by Emerson: God hides opportunities by putting them near us. So it's all close and it's all near. There will be several key points in my presentation, and we will speak about technology. So that's continuity of consumer preferences. Let's start here. You can see two pictures, 1921 and 2021. So these are pictures from fashion magazines now and 100 years ago. Of course, they've been retouched a bit, but this shows the trend. People keep their values, their client preferences, and they have the same vision of beauty. Today, we still have a request for personified high-quality partner attitude, and that's in line with the human nature. A client requires attention, and such a thing as empathy and being on the same wavelength with the client shapes up the client's attitude to the securities market as well. And there is some research out there. I read the Royal Bank of Scotland some time ago, and they say that they have managed to bring their level of personified attitude to clients to the level of the 1970s. These are best practices in English banks. When 100 years ago or 200 years ago there was one bank clerk for one client who knew everything about that client. Then let's get back to the technology. When we analyze top 10 best capitalized companies in the world, we see that 70% are tech companies from the fintech industry, and 40% of top 50 world companies are younger than 20 years. We see exponential growth of high-tech companies worldwide. And clients buying services of these companies vote with their money for leadership of certain services. Now, some words about the forecast. That's the Ernst & Young research about 2035. What financial services will be offered by digital platforms? So that's capital management and financing, and almost 50% of capital management and financing will be based on digital platforms, and we should look at new solutions at the securities market based on this forecast. When giving some top-level assessment to the situation in the Belarusian market. That's penetration of internet technologies in the Belarusian market. That's the foundation. Look, we have 1.3 mobile devices per one resident of the country, and 35% of population use mobile devices in their daily life. 85% of citizens have a bank account at the same time. That's in general picture for Belarus. And now a couple of words about the securities market. Here we have two big segments, the external and domestic market, and bonds and stocks. As to the stock market, there's so much information about it, but it's so fragmented, and I personally spent a lot of time browsing reports on securities and on the stock market from the finance ministry, and I found that information there. And the C-Bonds team, as far as I know, prepares research. And well done, you managed to find this information about the stock market of Belarus, and that's great that you present us with this information and bring it to us in a systemic way. So the stock market is worth $1.9 billion now, and the stock market capitalization is below 3% of GDP. And the growth rate is the same, it's low, and the stock market is underdeveloped, and it's not developed at all. And there are a lot of reasons behind that. The key reason is a big share of government or government-related companies in the market, and we are lagging behind our neighboring countries and our partner countries. So when it comes to the bond market, its amount is $4.6 billion as of today, and it's split into the external and domestic market. And some issues were mentioned today, and one of them is the sovereign. I see the former deputy finance minister here in this audience, and he participated in all sovereign bond issues in the international market. And he'll be our speaker tomorrow. And now he is coordinating efforts related to borrowing in one of our largest companies, Eurotorg, and the name has already been mentioned in previous presentations. Then the Development Bank, Eurotalk, and the Finance Ministry are three key issues shaping up the external market. In the domestic market, let's focus on the corporate bond. The amount here is $1.9 billion worth of corporate bonds issued in the country. And I have a comment on Eurobonds. As due to higher sanctions pressure on Belarus, we see lower prices for almost all international market instruments. And this is an interesting peculiarity here, as Eurotalk bond quotes today are comparable with sovereign debt in terms of yields. So the sovereign debt is getting cheaper with the sanctions build up, and that's been the case over the week. And the process is really fast. Getting back to the corporate bond market, we have two instruments here. Bank bonds account for about 20% of the market, and about 80% of bonds are issued by non-banking corporates. And the legislative situation in the country is like this. Starting from 2018, we've had conditions for issuing new instruments such as digital assets. We call them tokenized assets in our local regulation. Our bank was among the pioneers initiating the launch of a marketplace for digital assets. And in the CIS space, it's the first experience like that when it's possible to issue a digital bond and place it on a platform functioning as a high-tech park resident in this country. These are 2020 figures, and there was an issue of tokenized bonds worth $50 billion, and currently the amount of tokenized bonds outstanding in the market is about 90 billion rubles, and they are traded on the FinStore platform. 3% is not that much. And what is a tokenized bond? It's an unsecured bond, and if we look at economically compatible segments, we have corporate bonds in the market that are classified as unsecured bonds as well. And here the picture is different in terms of the shares of the market. In 2019, the share of tokenized assets was below 2.5%. In 2020, it increased to 20%. And in 2021, we expect this share to get to 50% of tokenized bonds vis-à-vis corporate unsecured bonds. Why is the segment developing? It's a successful project, and we have a platform to sell tokenized assets, and then it's about the competitive environment. Companies don't have a right to sell FX-denominated bonds in the domestic market, and then there's been ongoing discussion about canceling the income tax for buyers of these bonds, and all that incentivizes companies to sell bonds outside the standard regulatory framework supported by the Finance Ministry, and there's a special department in the Finance Ministry setting bond issuance rules for legal entities. In Belarus, there are a number of presidential decrees and provisions on the high-tech park. These are base documents defining opportunities for emergence of new instruments based on digital assets. What are the peculiarities? Today, when issuing a tokenized corporate bond, there are no requirements from the finance ministry because standard issue procedures do not apply to tokenized assets. It is not necessary to get an issue prospectus approved by the finance ministry, for example. Issuing tokenized bonds takes several days. It is done by publishing a public offer on the FinStore platform, and this offer is the issue declaration about the planned bond issue. FX legislation also doesn't apply to such bonds. So despite constraints on foreign currency denominated bonds, issuers can issue digital bonds in the context of the current legislation. And the key idea here is that this regulation is fixed at the presidential level. So it's all absolutely legal, and then that is why there is interest from corporate issuers in this segment. Here there are benefits of tokenized digital platforms, and I would like to mention boundless opportunities for tokenization of any assets. We now have debt tokens in the market, but there are ongoing discussions about tokenizing government debt. The next step is tokenization of shared participation, so we can have tokenized stocks. And this is based on deep integration of tech platforms and deep penetration of the internet technology in the local market. And all those aspects can be interesting for investors and issuers. And to wrap it up, I'd like to say that we have two platforms dealing with tokenized assets, that's FinStore and currency.com. FinStore is more about local players and their bonds, and currency.com is about international tokenized assets. So it's a platform where you can have tokenized shares of Apple, Google, you can buy tokenized gold and indices. You can see these companies' performance, and you can see manifold exponential growth for FinStore and for currency.com. So, to finish my presentation, I would like to wish all the market participants a lot of success. I would like to thank Sergey and the team for your attention to the Belarusian market in your daily activity. Invest with us. It's really lucrative and interesting for investors and issuers. Taras, thanks a lot. That's quite an interesting topic of tokenized bonds. And that's a kind of a Belarusian know-how, because I haven't heard about anything like that in any other country in the world. And after the conference in Minsk in March, I registered on this platform. I tried buying something, but I couldn't pay with my Russian Visa card. I couldn't top up my FinStore account, and that's when I stopped, and then I totally forgot about it. So I want to start from scratch, and there should be some more ways to top up accounts there. We've been talking about going to the Russian market with this platform, and we've been in preliminary negotiations with the Russian market participants. So it's a local story now. We are fine-tuning the processes, and it's been around for just 1 year, 2020. Thank you. Now let's look at one more country that is to the south. So we've looked east and west, and now we're looking south. And that's the sunny Armenia. And the speaker from Armenia today will be CEO of the Central Depository of Armenia, Vagan Stepanyan. Vagan, the floor is yours. Do tell us about the bond market in Armenia. First of all, I would like to thank CBonds team, headed by Sergey, for this opportunity to present the Armenian capital market at this wonderful event. Despite of all the difficulties of the previous year, Armenia is still the country of big opportunities today. Armenia is rated Ba3 by Moody's, B+ by Fitch, and both ratings have stable outlooks. In the Doing Business list, Armenia is ranked 47 among 190 countries. There are a lot of tax incentives in Armenia, and they are targeted at the capital market development. All investors are exempt from the tax on income generated by securities, be it dividends, sale, and all other things. The corporate income tax is just 18%. There is also a favorable tax regime in place for investment funds. They have to pay 0.01% of their net asset value per annum. So that's quite a lucrative rate and quite lucrative regulation. So our macroeconomic metrics are stable despite all the tough situation last year, and the outlook is quite positive for this year, and we hope that it will all fall into place. Armenia issued Eurobonds 3 times. The first Eurobond issue was in 2014. The amount was $700 million and the yield stood at 6%. The last Eurobond was sold in the beginning of this year, worth almost $590 million, yielding as low as 3.6%. Demand was very high for that issue, reaching almost $900 million, if my memory doesn't fail me, but the placed amount was $587 million. The exchange rate is slightly up now, and currently it has reached 500 drams per dollar, and the figure in the chart is as of May, and here you can see certain stability. Now here is some information about the capital market. Here you can see securities trended on the stock exchange, and we can see that government securities take up the biggest chunk of the market, and this is because primary placements are held on the stock exchange when we speak about government securities. In 2020, the amount of government bonds sold in the primary market was 30% higher than in 2019. We have quite a well-developed repo platform. As of May 2021, the volume here was slightly down, but in 2020 it reached $2.6 million, which was almost 2 times higher than in 2019. The corporate bond market has also been on the rise. Yields on government bonds vary. It also depends on their tenor. And the range here is from 6% to 9%. All government bonds are denominated in the Armenian dram. The Armenia Securities Exchange is an operator of an online platform called GP Minfin. This is our know-how. The platform was developed for direct retail sales of government bonds to private individuals and legal entities. You can buy government bonds there in real time. The issuer, that is the Treasury Department of the Finance Ministry, uses this platform to place or buy back bonds. To get identified on this platform, you need to have an Armenian ID card. So the platform is not available for foreign investors yet. But we are planning to upgrade it and find safer identification options for foreign investors. So that's GP Minfin again, and this is the corporate bond market in Armenia, and the biggest share belongs to US dollar denominated corporate bonds. The yield here reaches up to 6%. And in the segment denominated in the Armenian dram, the yield reaches 10%. I would like to underscore that all those corporate bonds are serviced by NSD, and they are available for Russian investors in that way. So Russian investors can buy them and keep in a national securities depository. Here you can see aggregate capital market data. We can say that all figures here show positive growth. This slide is devoted to AMX group. We represent this group, and the group includes the Armenia Securities Exchange and the Central Depository of Armenia. The Armenia Securities Exchange is the only stock exchange in Armenia. It offers professional market participants an automated electronic platform for trading in the securities market. The Central Depository of Armenia is the centralized registrar for all joint stock companies in Armenia. It also provides clearing and settlement services. It is also a central registrar for the pension system participants, and it is also pension savings administrator. The Armenia Securities Exchange allows trading in the following instruments: repo transactions, credit resources, FX transactions, corporate bonds, government bonds, and shares. As of today, the Central Depository of Armenia has $4.8 billion worth of assets in custody. The biggest chunk is represented by shares, accounting for almost 95%, and bonds account for 5%. If you look at the figures here, you will see positive dynamics as well, and we think this growth will continue further. The Central Depository is connected to SWIFT. We are a member of the Association of Eurasian Central Securities Depositories, and as a national neighboring agency we assign ISIN codes, and we are also a member of the Association of National Numbering Agencies. The Central Depository of Armenia cooperates with Central Securities Depositories of Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Ukraine. We also have a bilateral link with Clearstream and NSD. The Clearstream system accepts Armenian government securities and securities issued by Armenian IFIs. Apart from that, local securities are also serviced by Raiffeisen Bank. The year 2020 saw a lot of achievements, and I would like to mention several of them. A new platform for auctioning government bonds was presented on the stock exchange. The Armenia Securities Exchange was named the best stock exchange in South Caucasus in 2020. The FundNet platform was developed to support registration of investment funds. AMX held an unprecedented auction and sold $125 million worth of government securities. One more significant breakthrough is that securities quote on the Armenia Securities Exchange got cross-listed on the Moscow Exchange. We will talk about it later. The Central Depository launched an application called CDA Online. We created an online depository for our clients, and clients of the Central Depository can now manage their securities account online using our web application and our mobile application. This application has an embedded e-voting system, and here investors can access documents of the general shareholder meeting and vote not leaving their homes. And there are several ongoing projects. And some of them will be finished this year, and some of them will be finished in the near future. That's our plan. So several of them are for the stock exchange, and several of them are for the depository. We have here an alternative trading platform similar to GP MinFin application, but this platform is for corporate securities. The second project is an electronic listing platform, a new app automating listing operations to cut down paper documentation flow between the stock exchange and issuers. A new trading platform for loans and deposits is also on the list, and it's for those participating in credit certificate trading. And then there is DMA access. When we speak about the stock exchange, it's an application by Quick, a new trading system for direct online access of individuals and legal entities to trading platforms of the Armenia Securities Exchange. Then, for the depository, it's a tri-party repo, a model of a new platform for repo transactions between commercial banks using government bonds as collateral. Centralized custody of government bonds is another project, as now the Central Securities Depository of Armenia is a central custodian for corporate bonds only. Government bonds are in custody of the central bank now. And now we are working on a joint program with the government of Armenia and the central bank to transfer custody of government bonds to the central depository. Our plans include creation of the central counterparty. A model is being discussed now to outsource the National Clearing Center functions, and we also plan to upgrade our CDA online application. That's it from me. Thank you. Vagan, thanks a lot. Are there any questions from the floor? We are ready to take several questions. So to start, I have a question to Taras. Taras, from a legal standpoint, do you think that tokenized bonds are bonds? Or is it a separate asset class? Because in C-bonds we had a big discussion on this topic if we need to add tokenized bonds to the bond database. And my colleagues told me that they were not willing to do it because they were not bonds. So legally that's a separate class, it's a digital asset, but if we look at their economic nature, it's the same instrument as bonds. And when we tokenize government debt, then the questions of nature of this instrument will be lifted. So in the legal framework, this is not a bond, this is a separate asset class, but economically, it's a standard instrument. So when the scale of the market is big enough and this influences the balance of instruments in the market, so be it a corporate bond as a standard security or a digital asset, then this chunk of the market should be included in your database because this will be a significant market share. I will have more reasons to introduce to my colleagues for adding them to the database.